Welcome to the Programming Electronics Academy podcast. Join us every other week as we explore how everyday people are creating extraordinary things in the world. Find us online at programmingelectronics.com.
Hello, I hope you're doing great. Thanks for joining me this week. This is Michael with Programming Electronics Academy. If this is your first time listening, hey, welcome. Glad you're here. What we're trying to do is help educate and inspire you about programming and electronics. We release a new show every other week on Monday morning, and it's usually an interview with somebody who's doing interesting things in technology. Mostly I'm kind of interested in microcontrollers and stuff like Arduino, so those are most of the guests we'll be talking about. This week, I had a very enjoyable conversation with Jack Gupton. He is an educator, he's a public school teacher, and he teaches a technology class, programming class, to students out there. We talk about the success he's had in the program, some of the challenges he has, some of the challenges the students have, and I tell you, it gives some really neat insights. So here we go. Here's the show. Well, Jack, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so you and I met probably a couple years ago now, online with, I would say with mutual interest in Arduino and kind of teaching Arduino. And I'm curious just to hear a little bit about your background and how you got into learning about Arduino and ultimately kind of introducing it to your classrooms. Sure.
My background is perhaps maybe a little unusual, or maybe not. I don't know for a teacher, but I'm in my 40s, and I actually have had a couple of careers prior to this, and started teaching about 5.5 years ago, and taught math and woodshop. And towards the end of my second year, I got really excited about Arduino, just kind of on my own, and sort of the STEM movement, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics movement, and pitched an idea to our principal. Said, hey, I'd really like to try this out. It's not really something that I've got any curriculum for or any kind of examples I can point to, but I'd kind of like to give it a shot, and the principal was amenable to it. So kind of took that on, and it was a trial by fire for sure. Looking around, like you said, you and I became acquainted online, and was really super happy to meet you and learn of the stuff that you were working on, and then be able to leverage some of the stuff that you've done. So that's kind of where I came from in terms of getting into it. I suppose from a teaching standpoint, just personally, I've always been a tinkerer and like to mess with, electronics, and did a little bit of computer programming in a prior life. And so, this is just a cool platform for me. Got really excited about it. Got, really geeked out about it, and was excited to bring it to my kids at school.
That's cool. And so did it get introduced as like its own, was it part of its own class then, is how it ended up? You had like a technology class or something that you introduced it with, or did you like pull it into an existing class that was already kind of going on, or? So
it was really, interestingly enough, it was not a class that existed in terms of something that anyone else was doing, at least around here. And so just the nuts and bolts of it, we utilized an existing class from a concept standpoint, but kind of from the very start, kind of rewrote the book on what we were doing. And the kids actually started using Scratch initially. You've probably seen MIT's Scratch.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of a block-based programming environment. And so I used that to sort of introduce them to the concepts, some of the basic concepts of programming. And it was a really low-stress way to get them, starting to think computationally. And that took about, I would say, 2.5, 3 months of the first portion of the class. And then I introduced the Arduino, where they went through, like the 19 experiments that are in your Arduino for Absolute Beginners guide, and had them go through them. Initially for me, it was trying to stay ahead of them because, I hadn't necessarily done all of them and didn't know all the ins and outs and nuts and bolts of things. So that first year was just, let's see what happens. Let's go ahead and get it wired, get it coded, and see what it does. And if it looks plausible, then we can kind of talk about it and move on from there. So that's kind of where it began. Since then, it's evolved into a fair bit more than that. But that was our first time around.
That's neat. And what age range of kids are we talking?
These are eighth graders, so anywhere from 12 to 14 in most cases.
Okay. And how often were they meeting in the class?
That was a daily class, so one, I'll say 46-minute block of time that first year.
That's nice to be able to have that consistency, to have the kids come in and see it and then see it again the next day. I think that's important.
It is. One of the things we learned that first year that we've changed since then is, and this is an exciting thing in many ways, but at the end of the class, you obviously need time to clean up and put the Arduino and the wires and all the other bits and pieces away. And the kids would groan when I'd say, "Hey, everybody's time to clean up," because they had just, when you're doing something like Arduino, it requires some critical thinking and kind of getting into that deep cognitive work. And a 46-minute amount of time after, we've gotten everything set up and maybe I've said a few words about what we're working on, didn't leave a lot of time for them to really kind of get into the meat of it. And so after that first year, we set it up to where the class was backing to another class. In this case, it's a science class. And we had a lot of demand for the class. So we had a lot of kids who wanted into it. So we were able to create two classes that were back to back. And so the kids now, and it's continued since then to be that kind of back to back thing, the kids now work in a block schedule. So they see me 3 days a week. 2 of those days are 2 periods adjacent to one another. So this year it's second and third period. So they'll see me for about an hour and I'd say 40 minutes straight. And then they'll go to the science class the next day. And then one of the days we see them both. But that has made a huge difference for them in terms of what they're able to accomplish, because they get into that deep thinking, because they're having to problem solve and critically think to get through this, because you can follow instructions and you can type in code, but inevitably you will wire something incorrectly or you'll code something incorrectly, and you've got to go back and figure it out. And what's more, now, that first year they just would hook it up, code it, show it to me, and I checked them off. Now they have to come up and they have to explain the wiring, the flow of electricity. They've got to explain the components, how they work, and they have to explain the code and how information is being utilized throughout the Arduino in order to get checked off. So they really have to spend a lot of time kind of grinding through that to figure it out. And they do that in a group. So there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of talking, and a lot of mutual help and learning that happens, in a small group setting.
Wow, that sounds fun. I think that would be fun to do in a class. But you sound like a tough teacher, man.
I do tell them it's going to be one of the hardest things that they ever experience, especially as eighth graders. But at the same time, so this is the 4th year of the class. So they've also competed in a county-wide maker challenge. I mean, Arduino is at the heart of the maker movement, so I'm sure that your audience is pretty familiar with that. But they compete against other junior highs, high schools, and colleges in this maker challenge. And every year so far, they have signed petitions requiring me to come in over spring break so they can work. They want to come in over their spring break to do this stuff. So I know it's hard. They know it's hard, but they develop a real passion for it. They really seem to enjoy it. They want to be in the class. They want to come during lunch, before school, after school to do this stuff because they see the value in it.
What are the biggest challenges for some of the kids going through the class?
It varies. Some of them, we're going through this right now. Some of the kids are completely through all of the experimental phase of the class, which is what they go through, and have to, like what we just talked about, explain. And they complete the experiment, they work collaboratively, and they explain it. So you've got that one side of things. And then you've got others, they're not as predisposed to it. And so when it comes to programming, it's kind of like, I think back to as a student myself being a freshman, and the kids, they do this a lot earlier now than when I was a kid. But as a freshman, I struggled to get through regular algebra. My brain just wasn't ready for it. And there's a lot of algebra, from my thinking, there's a lot of that, solving of equations that happens in programming. And so if your brain isn't ready for it, I definitely see kids who struggle more initially to kind of get through things. Eventually, many of them really do. Most of them really do start to grasp it, and it absolutely helps them in their math classes because they're able to draw comparisons between math, what they're doing in their math class and then what they're doing in our class with Arduino. But that's one of the biggest challenges is just, there's a lot of abstracts in programming. The concept of a variable is just that's either going to make sense to somebody right away, or they're going to struggle with it for a long time. You're just assigning a value to a variable, and the fact that the variable doesn't do anything, despite the fact its name says something that implies it does something. There's those kind of challenges. Initially for me, if I'm talking to a new teacher that wants to start this, I tell them to be prepared to not know what's going on part of the time and be okay with that. There's times when I began this that it took me a while to really figure out what was going on programmatically, or even, the electronics of it. And so that challenge is going to be there, and you just kind of have to be okay with it until you find your way through it and kind of build that knowledge yourself as well.
Wow,
so I think those, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah, those are really great points. I know, like, for me, the math, in high school and middle school, I always had a difficult time with math. And for me, really, I didn't start to embrace it, I think, until I got to college and felt like I could apply myself a little more. But I could see that as a struggle for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of like the student struggle. What about as an instructor? I guess just logistically kind of doing a class like this. What are some of the challenges you've had?
I kind of run my class in a strange fashion, I think. I don't do a lot of what's called direct instruction, which is where, I would stand at the front of the class and say to, class today, let's open our book to page whatever, and let's talk through this, and let me model this learning for you. I prefer in most cases to give them a text or a video, or both, if I can, to give them both and let them try at their own pace. Because, just trying to listen to somebody talk and assimilate, especially if you're talking about something as complex as programming or wiring, there's a lot of topic or a lot of concepts and a lot of depth to that's very hard to get in one sitting. And so I like for them to be able to try it on their own with a text where they're reading through instructions and attempting it. I like to give them that video sometimes, because some people just learn, visually and with the auditory side of things, to have those multiple ways to access it before I even talk to them. And so I think that, when I teach teachers, because I have teachers now come in and go through some of these things as well to help them get up and running for their own classes, I do have a tendency to do some of that direct instruction. And I know that it's more difficult generally for people to access things that way. So, I think a lot of folks maybe are accustomed to the old style, or I don't want to use the phrase old style, but where, the traditional way of learning is that there's an instructor in the front that's talking and disseminating information. And I want my students to know that I don't know everything, and that there's just a universe of learning that can happen as you become more, aware of how to go and find that for yourself. With the internet, you can learn anything you want to on your own. And I want them to understand that. I don't want them to count on me as being the one conduit of learning. And of course, I'm there helping them along the way. And, I prefer to look at myself as a tour guide as opposed to their teacher. And so I want to put them in those situations to where they're going to experience, the learning, and they're going to go through some challenges. And then if I am going to do that direct instruction, it's at the end. It's where we kind of come back and look at what we've gone through, and now they kind of got an understanding that they wouldn't have had if I tried to just start it off at the beginning and say, hey, this is this and this is that, and here you go. They actually understand what some of that means now, and they've got some experience to base a conversation on. That environment is kind of a challenge. It's very noisy. It's very, ambiguous. It's very fluid. And so I know that's not a comfortable situation for many.
Wow. Now, do the kids have, do they all, I know you mentioned that you said they work in groups. Do they each work around like a computer station together then? They've got an Arduino plugged in kind of thing? Is that how it goes?
I require that everybody has their own Arduino, their own package of electronics, and their own PC. And everybody has to do the experiment themselves. And everybody has to ensure that it works. And then they can talk about it, as a group collectively, and they can turn it in collectively where we can kind of have that conversation. But yeah, it's all one-on-one. It's all individual initially.
Oh, okay. That's neat. Do any of the kids take what they're learning and do stuff outside of the classroom, or is it pretty much in the classroom, or?
Both. I mean, it just really depends on the individual student. Some of them are, they took the class and they enjoy it, but it's not necessarily their passion, where others, they absolutely do stuff outside the class. And it's always awesome for me when they say, "Hey, Mr. Gupton, is it okay if I do this at home?" I don't give homework. So yeah, okay, go ahead. Anything you'd like. But, with that maker challenge, they absolutely have to apply this. So the maker challenge they compete in, they're required to, it's a collaborative effort of anywhere from 2 to 5 students. And they are, the prompt from the challenge is to create something new that doesn't exist to solve a problem in the world around you, or significantly repurpose something else that already exists to a new end for the same purpose, to solve a problem around you. So they're absolutely being asked to use what they're learning with Arduino in real world ways. And it's a very powerful experience for them, because as hard as that process of coming up to turn in an assignment is, in that, that small pack of kids trying to explain the experiment, creating something that doesn't exist from scratch is a whole new level of, ambiguity and frustration. But I will tell you that at the end of it, the sense of self, worth and self-esteem and accomplishment is astronomical. These kids, the smiles on their face when they figure out how to make whatever it is that they've come up with work, and inevitably it's using Arduino. It's powerful. It's a really powerful experience for them, and I think it gives them a great deal of self-confidence as they move forward in their education and in their lives as workers that go to college and then have real jobs.
That's exciting. I'm sure it's got to be fulfilling for you too, to be able to see their success. I know that's cool.
Well, one of the stories I like to tell, and I actually saw this student a few weeks back, is if you remember the last experiment, the Matrix experiment, where they've got a 3x3 array of LEDs.
Yes.
I had a young lady working on that, and I try very hard not to answer questions. It's really, I want to let them try and solve their own problems. And so this young lady was working on trying to get that to work that first year for about a week. And I don't want to allow them to get to the point of where they become, where they shut down or where they become despondent over what they're trying to do. And I could see that she was getting to that point. And so I sat down next to her and, said, well, let's look at it together and see what we can see. And just looking at, observing how the experiment was behaving, I said, I think that your wiring is okay. Let's look at your code. So we looked at her code, and I said, I see something here that may not be exactly right, but I don't. And I didn't even get to finish my sentence. She stabbed her finger at the computer. She said, it's right there. That's the problem. I used a number instead of the letter I for a variable. Get out of the way. She about shoved me out of the way. She recoded it. She got it to work, and the smile on her face still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. And I talked to her a few weeks ago, and she said, yeah, I still feel really, really excited about what I was able to do there. So yeah, it's very, very fulfilling for me, despite the fact they make me work over spring break. But that in and of itself is rewarding. If you think about it in the right light, it's exciting that kids want to give up their time to come in and do this stuff.
That's cool. So let's say there's a teacher out there who's listening, or an educator of some fashion, and they're thinking about integrating Arduino or some type of technology, maybe even Scratch programming, like you mentioned, into their classroom. Any recommendations for them if they're just kind of getting started?
Not to, step on Nike's toes here, but just do it. Just embrace it. Go after it. Don't expect to get it right the first time. Plan to fail. And, honestly, that's something that's a space that we have to live in these types of classes. You have to plan to fail and be willing to deal with that and change and learn from it. And you got to tell your students that too. It's kind of an interesting conversation to have with them on day one, but I always say, hey, y'all, be ready to fail. You're going to fail a lot in here. That doesn't mean that your grade is going to be a failure, because I don't grade you on, whether or not you get this right the first time or not. I want to see that you do get it right eventually, but it's your tenacity, your endurance, your perseverance, and you continuing to get after this until you get it right that I value as a teacher. And so I try to have that attitude about it myself. we try to introduce new things all the time and take those risks and be willing to accept that it's not going to work out all the time. So just do it. Just do it. You won't regret it. And the teachers that come through and see our program, it's really cool because they'll whisper to me sometimes, this is how I want to spend the rest of my career every day doing this stuff. Because it's hard work, but it's so fulfilling and it's so amazing what the kids get out of it. It's so powerful that once you do it, you'll never want to stop.
Yeah, I remember teaching, I taught this volunteer class and I was teaching processing. I don't know if you've heard of processing.
Yep.
It was just an absolute failure. I mean, I felt so under-equipped, as an instructor to these students and stuff. But in the end, I think some kids still got some value from it. And the next year when I did it, it got a little bit better. And then the next year when I did it, it got a little bit better, and it kind of all morphed through. And I learned a lot. I think the kids were kind and they learned too, but I think you're right. That's a really great point. You just got to go for it and do your best at it.
Yeah, it'll never be 100%. If you wait till it's a friend of mine, it's actually the science teacher who backs up to my class, who we share the kids with. One of the sayings that he has is, if you wait for it to be perfect, you'll never, ever get it done. You'll never start. So just don't be afraid to don't be afraid to get dirty and blow things up a little bit. It's inherent with learning. We learn more from failure than we do from getting something done right the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack, any plans for the future? Any like big ideas or thoughts about how, where you want to take this in your school and stuff?
So it's funny, when we began this journey 4 years ago, I told you we started with Scratch, where they made a video game, and then we did the Arduino. And my plans at that time were to transition into flight. I wanted them to design, build, and fly airplanes because there's a tremendous amount of STEM learning that we can do there. And we got invited to that maker challenge that I've described. And they originally designed it to be high schools and colleges, junior colleges. And they weren't inviting middle schools. And so they didn't have enough participants. And so our school and one other middle school were invited to participate. And they had this whole pitch about it, what it was going to be. And they said, and you'll get a free 3D printer. So I said, you've got me. I'm in. I don't even care what we have to do. I'm brand new at this, and I'm scraping, borrowing and stealing to get stuff. So I'm in. Let's do it. And so that took out that flight component. We did not have time for it. The amount of hours and days we had to devote to creating that Maker Challenge project, or the kids doing it rather, just ate up too much of our calendar. And so this year we've changed. We've pulled the Scratch portion of the class out. I talked to the kids, and we all agreed that as cool as that would be, they wanted to start Arduino sooner. And so part of that is that it's freed up some schedule. And so this year have begun the process of through the science class and through the STEM class. In our district, we call it STEAM. But to teach them about flight, and we're beginning to build airplanes. And our hope is that we'll be able to get them either in the gymnasium or out in the backfields flying them later this school year.
Wow, that's pretty ambitious. That's awesome.
Well, we'll see what happens. Maybe watch the news and see if we're on it for hopefully for the right reasons, and not for sending an airplane into some place it's not supposed to go.
Cool. Oh, that's fantastic. That's I really appreciate, again, you taking the time to talk, Jack. It's been really neat to hear about your story and what you're doing with the kids. Are there any last thoughts you want to leave us with? I
will say this, that I think that Arduino in the hands of kids, especially at this age, is just one of the most important and powerful learning opportunities. And I'm honored to have been able to, be a part of it with them. And I'm grateful to you once again for letting us use your materials over the years. It's been terrific. The kids, I told the kids that we were going to be talking, and I asked if they had anything to say, and they wanted to tell you thank you. And they also said they appreciated some of the humor that you inject into your writing. They get a kick out of it. So.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear kids like really lame humor. That's great.
It's interesting what middle school kids find funny.
And I believe you still owe me some fish tacos, if I remember correctly.
Whenever you're out here, we're going to go get some good Mexican food.
All right. Great. Hey, thanks a ton, Jack. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our discussion. I know I really did. Jack seems like a great guy, and it was a pleasure to be able to speak with him. Big shout out to all his students. They seem like great kids. I'll make sure to link to some resources in the show notes that can help you kind of follow up on what we discussed. And I just wanted to say thanks so much for joining me and listening. I hope you consider subscribing to the show, rating us in iTunes, giving us a review there. It'd be much appreciated. I want to end this show and say a big thanks to Bob. In fact, let's just dedicate the show to Bob. If you're out there listening, and I think you are, I know things have been tough or can be tough, but the outlook is wonderful. All right, hey, I will see you in the next show. Thanks, bye.
This show is produced by Programming Electronics Academy, an online technology education company. We exist to help you create the technology you want in your life. If you are interested in learning more about Arduino, we welcome you to sign up for our free Arduino Crash Course, a 12-part video series with accompanying written lessons designed to teach the basics of programming Arduino. To register for the course, simply text your email address to 440-701-5311, or you can visit programmingelectronics.com and sign up there.